welcome to the Ground and Pwn Podcast, a weekly show for fans of combat sports, gaming, entertainment, and plenty more. I'm Brian Shea, online content director at Game Informer, joined by Scott Fontana, the New York Post's MMA reporter. After last week's episode and all the negative news we had to focus on, I've got to say, Scott, it is nice to be able to focus on fights again. The UFC had its first card of 2023. We've got a pay-per-view on the horizon. Plus, we got some massive unexpected news in the post-fight press conference. And then, unfortunately, the gaming side has not quite ramped up its engines yet. So, Scott, before we jump into those topics, did you catch any playoff football?
I did. I actually haven't really gotten the chance to watch much football with like a friend this year. Because mostly I watch my team and no one else cares about my team, and my team is bad. So I mostly watch them from home. But this time, them being out, the Panthers have not been to the playoffs in about 5 years now. Oh, that hurts to say. And so I went to my buddies and I was watching the Bills-Dolphins game. And man, like the Bills were getting off to the start that I expected. And I'm like, oh, this is you know, I'm not like I don't hate Miami, but I had let's say I had monetary interest in the Bills covering their 13.5 point spread, and it was looking great for a while. Then all of a sudden they just decided, hey, why don't we make this close? Let's just make every turnover we possibly can.
Yeah, but they came back and won.
They did. They had to come back and win a game. They were up by like 14-0 or 17-0 or something.
My former neighbor, like the neighbor I used to grow up babysitting, actually was at the game.
Okay.
And he's been a Bills fan his entire life. I remember him having like Doug Flutie merchandise and everything when I was growing up, like babysitting him and everything.
Was he eating Flutie Flakes?
He was
Nice.
He was eating the Flutie Flakes. But yeah, so I was happy that he got to go there. It looked like it was him, his brother, and his dad, and like a few friends were all there. So that was probably a stressful but good time in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I am a Ravens fan and I live in Minneapolis. So, of course, I'm going to root for the Vikings because my rule is always that I will root for the team of the city that I live in as long as my team's not playing them and they're not divisional rivals. So, like, when I lived in Pittsburgh, I never rooted for the Steelers. But
yeah, because I would never do that.
So that is my rule for like when I live in a city. So, like, when I lived in Austin, like, I'm not as huge of a basketball fan, but like I'm a Wizards fan. So like the San Antonio Spurs, I rooted for them because like they were good back then. And also, even though San Antonio is like an hour south of Austin. But
it's as close as you're getting in the NBA.
Exactly. I guess, there's the Rockets that are like 3 hours away, but I was rooting for them. And then but because they weren't division rivals of the Wizards. But yeah, so that's my rule. So I was rooting for the Vikings and the Ravens yesterday. That didn't work out so well because, the Vikings lost kind of like the afternoon game. And both those games were actually relatively like very close. I think a lot closer than we expected, especially in the case of the Ravens game.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people were expecting a really good game because in the Giants and Vikings anyway, because the last one was a very good game as well. No one could have expected it to be better than their Christmas Eve game, but this was still pretty good. But I'm obviously in New Jersey, about a stone's throw from where the Giants and Jets play their home games. So this is definitely big for a lot of my friends in the area who are Giants fans and things. I could care less about the Giants, but it was good football. Obviously Sunday at the nighttime, I was thinking of you watching that Ravens game, and I imagine you had a roller coaster of emotion as they're trying to get the ball in from the one, dive in over the pile, the ball falls out, and defensive lineman picks it up and runs it 98 yards for a touchdown the other way.
That was the one time that in the moment I was very upset that I didn't have a Twitter still, because I just wanted to be like, what? Like, just go on like a tirade, basically. And then in retrospect, I was very glad I didn't have a Twitter in that moment because it's
one or the other or both.
But that was when I texted my buddy. So my buddy actually had a very funny text to me. He texted Sunday morning saying, "Which horror show are you watching tonight? HBO's The Last of Us or the Ravens versus the Bengals?" Just to let you know how much faith we had in this team without Lamar Jackson.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting that like as the years go on, and unfortunately this year we didn't have Lamar in the latter part of the season, nor did we have him in our one playoff game.
Right.
Where I think during that time when Lamar Jackson burst onto the scene and won MVP and everything, everybody was like, okay, this guy's going to win a Super Bowl. Like, it's just a matter of time. And it just hasn't happened. And the years are going on, and it's like, the Ravens are having some like contract disputes with him over the last year and change. And it's starting to be like, all right, is this guy really ever going to win a Super Bowl? And I imagine it's much in the way that it was with Panthers fans and Cam Newton, where it was like, oh yeah, this guy's an unstoppable force. Of course he's going to win. That's how I felt about Cam Newton. Like when they went to that Super Bowl and lost, I remember thinking in my head, like, oh, don't worry, Panthers fans. Like you'll be back. And like clearly, it's so interesting how like, it kind of works that way with a lot of fighters as well. Like, can you think of a fighter where it was like he or she got so close to winning a title and you're like, oh, well, don't worry, you'll be back. And then they just never came back?
Off the top of my head, that's a good question. Do you have anybody in mind?
I don't, but like the scenario is a familiar one. Like I'm trying to think, like maybe if he loses his next fight to which is on the books, it could potentially be Corey Sandhagen.
Yeah, Corey Sandhagen definitely has the feel of as far as recent examples go, he definitely has the feel of somebody who really ought to be able to get back there. It's got to be. I feel like there's got to be like a heavyweight who came along even too. Then it's just like eventually they're going to get there. Maybe
Curtis Blades, if he doesn't, like it seems like he's never going to get there with the news that came out this
yeah,
week.
I don't know if I ever felt like he was like well, he never even got the championship opportunity. So,
man, like I remember. I mean, a lot of people thought this in the moment, which I never really bought into it. But remember when Volkan Oezdemir fought Daniel Cormier, and then there was that scene in the back where after the fight when Daniel just ran through him, and he was like, "Hey, like you're a great fighter. Once I'm out of here, once I retire, this is your division," or something like that. And
I don't remember that being said, but I would have if I remembered it at the time. My first reaction hearing it now is, well, that's a nice thing to say to somebody.
It is, and like
but it may not be something that's. I mean, I'm sure he meant it in a sincere way, but also, I never saw that from Volkan Oezdemir.
Ever the benevolent champion, Daniel Cormier.
Yeah, he's an affable guy.
Yeah, and there's some news adjacent to him that we'll be talking about later in this episode.
Yeah. But yeah, so I watched all the football. It was some pretty good football generally all around. I mean, the Jaguars game, I was almost texting my buddy in the second quarter after they'd thrown 4 receptions and were down. I don't know what it was. It was 27-0, I believe. I almost text my buddy and say, "Hey, sorry, man. I've been there before. My Panthers had a really crappy game against the Cardinals years back. Jake Delhomme was blowing it and everything." And I almost texted him, and I just kind of left it alone. And then all of a sudden, I look again because I turned it off. I was watching the fights, and it was 30-20. I was like, "Huh, what's going on here?" So yeah, it was starting to get wild. That was a wild game. I wish I had actually been watching it, but I was watching the fights, of course.
I thought of another example in the fighting side. Dominic Reyes.
Well, yeah. That's definitely a good recent example too.
It seemed like once John Jones was out of light heavyweight, that like the title was basically his. He just had to like run through Jan Blachowicz, and it was his. And then what happened, and then the precipitous fall that has occurred in his career ever since that fight.
Yeah, that's been a really terrible drop for him.
It has been. But I mean, hey, Cam Newton had a pretty harsh drop there for a minute.
Well, Cam is funny, and I don't want to go on too much of a tangent on this, but Cam Newton, he started off having a pretty promising career, and he never really got, I would say, significantly better as a passer year to year, but he had a couple times where he was a really good passer, and one of them was the MVP year, and then a few years later, it was, I believe it was 2018. And he was having, like, his numbers were even better than his MVP season. It was wild. And then all of a sudden, he starts tanking. And we figure out, it's because he's been playing through this awful shoulder injury. And this shoulder injury basically destroyed his career. He's, like, he didn't play last year. I don't think he necessarily considers himself to be out of football, but he's probably out of football more or less.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate when somebody reaches the highs that he did or almost did, especially with almost taking home a Super Bowl, and then just kind of falls off.
Sometimes you only get one shot, man. One opportunity.
What about Johnny Hendricks?
Johnny Hendricks, at least he won the title, and I believe he was able to defend it, right?
Did he?
I believe he had one title defense, but then there's some people who you would ask and say, well, he already beat George St. Pierre before that anyway.
Yeah, that was more or less what I was getting at. Is like he almost took down the GOAT, you know?
Yeah, but he did get his other opportunity. That's the thing.
Yeah.
That is the key to that scenario. Yeah, he let's see, he did not successfully defend the championship. He won the vacant belt, and then he lost it again in the rematch to Robbie Lawler.
Man. Yeah.
So he did no title defenses, but he did climb the mountain.
Yeah, fair enough.
And if you are in the camp that says he beat George St. Pierre, his next championship fight was just 4 months later. You could argue if you live in that world that he successfully defended his championship.
I think that it's one of those that's like that almost stings more because he won that fight in a lot of people's eyes, and it feels like a robbery to especially him, I would imagine. Like when you're
the fighters are going to feel more robbed than anybody else because number one, they're losing out part on their paycheck a lot oftentimes, but number two, in the championship situation is there's a lot more things that really come with that too. So yeah,
sure.
It's I get it. I think people sitting at home calling robbery a lot of the time are not really justified. This is maybe a closer one. I still think I can make an argument for GSP in that one, but it's it's definitely a tougher one compared to.
Can you tell that I've been missing talking about actual fights?
Yeah, it's nice to actually talk about fights. Let's
talking about Dana White's.
Do you want to talk about? Well, here's the thing though, because the fights that just happened on Saturday when I was watching that instead of football, they were fine. They were fine. Perfectly adequate card. We also got a different main event than we were expecting when we recorded our show. Which changed later that day. So when you were listening the next day and said, well, why are they talking about this fight? It's like, well, sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Hope you love us anyway. We recorded earlier in the day. But yeah, so we had Sean Strickland and Nasruddin Imavov, which was better than the last Sean Strickland fight, which was the last fight that we had seen in the UFC. It was better than that one. But honestly, this card was fine. It was all right. It ended up being okay.
I ended up going back and watching after the fact. I was at a party on Saturday, so I didn't get to watch live. And I told you I was like not really feeling this card anyway, but with the benefit of ESPN Plus on demand and being able to fast forward through the basically hour and a half of filler that exists on that 2 hour and 20-minute recording, it's a lot better. It is a lot better to skip all the commercials, all the like times where they're just like throwing to the analysts and talking and like killing time while basically they get the next fighters ready.
I have to ask you, do you ever stop and watch that stuff, or are you only watching the fights?
When I watch it live, I watch that stuff.
No, I understand. But when you do like what you did, are you ever like saying, oh, let me like stop for a second? Or are you just trying to get literally to the next fight every time?
I'm just trying to get to the next fight when I'm watching on demand, but most of the time it is live. So I do see it.
No, I understand that. I'm leading somewhere here. You can actually just go to, if you go into your ESPN Plus and you go down a little further, every individual fight is clipped out.
Ah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you should be doing. That will save you some time even more.
That's fair. Yeah, I did see that because, the scrubbing tool on the ESPN Plus app on Xbox is awful where you can't see where you are when you're fast forwarding. So I just had to hit fast forward and then stop and be like, all right, I hope I'm not like in the middle of like round 2 of some fight here when I stop this. So like, most of the time I've gotten pretty good at like stopping either when they're doing the tail of the tape or like I know the timing of the UFC so well by this point. I either get like the tail of the tape or while the fighters are getting introduced or like into their walkout, like one of those three.
But that's what's really good about those individual fights is that you can actually go and basically almost every one of these is going to work that way. Fast forward 90 seconds at the beginning of every fight, individual fights, right, on ESPN Plus.
Mm-hmm.
Then after that, unless there was some sort of delay for one reason or another, eye poke, something like that, usually around like the 6.5, 7 minute mark is when they'll come back for round 2. and then it's probably around like 13, 14 minutes. It will be for round 3. So you can actually, if you're sitting at home, our listeners here, if you're sitting at home wondering how you can really game the system and get the most out of your time, try to fast forward roughly with those in mind when you're watching the fights. Again, afterward, live fights, you're at the mercy of ESPN, just like all of us.
The one time that I stopped in the middle of like one of the prepared packages was they did a tribute to Stephan Bonnar. And, that I didn't watch that, but like I saw that like they were doing like kind of like a package on him, and the broadcast started with like in memory of Stephan Bonnar.
Sure.
So, I'm glad that they were paying homage to a guy that they have continually touted the importance of, and especially that one fight with Forrest Griffin as the Ultimate Fighter finale. That we talked about it a little bit on the show already, but just a very sad situation all around with him, and I'm glad the UFC is at least kind of paying homage to him.
Yes, homage they can pay.
Yeah,
they don't
the money
pay much else for the fighters, as we're now
especially
seeing
back then. Jeez.
with Francis Ngannou, which honestly is the much bigger news. We'll talk about the fights from Saturday a little bit more later, but the bigger news coming out of Saturday, and because you're not on Twitter, sir, you may have missed this. The news leaked.
Yeah, I did hear about
this. That. Yeah, so if you all missed it, because not everybody's on social media. If you missed it, the news about Francis Ngannou becoming a free agent, the UFC releasing him from his contractual obligations, that kind of thing, which more or less was at the end of his contract anyway. What they did was, it seems like they just waived the period.
Yeah, I think that, wasn't it like as of like the 20th, he was like supposed to be a free agent, and then like I guess they were just like, no, you can just go now. Like, we're clearly not going to see eye to eye on these negotiations. Like, Dana,
and honestly, good on them, because they didn't have to do that. I will at least give them that. There was a level of professionalism there in the sense that he's not throwing vitriol, he's not throwing shade. He's just saying we let him out. We couldn't. He's doing his usual. Oh, he doesn't. He wants easier fights for more money, which. Duh.
Yeah, I mean, also, like, shouldn't the UFC, where he's like, oh yeah, he wants to fight lesser competition for more money, and it's like, yeah, I mean, that's also like telling on yourself a little bit, that you guys know that you have the best fighters, and you also know that you don't pay as much as other organizations.
It's also, I mean, it's not exactly, it's not like he is looking for, I don't think he's looking for easier challenges, taking Dana's words at face value is not really the right thing to do here, because
nobody could run the organization but Dana. Don't worry. Like, this is true. Take his words at face value.
If anybody else was in charge, surely Francis Ngannou would have still left.
But he's done this a few times.
The point I want to make, though, Brian, is that there are other fights out there for him that are not just easy fights. Like maybe in mixed martial arts, yeah. Most of the best guys are in the UFC. There are actually some decent heavyweight talent out there in other organizations. It's not UFC level. It's not. The best ones are in the UFC. But there are other ways that he can now compete, and he can make a lot more money. The UFC never would have allowed him to go out there and fight Tyson Fury or something like that. Is that fight actually going to happen? I don't know. But if it does, at least now there's the possibility of it actually happening, and it could happen in myriad ways. It could be a boxing match. It could be, a kickboxing match. It could be an MMA fight. It could be a special rules kind of, Mighty Mouse versus Rod Tang kind of situation where you do, alternating rounds. There's so many different options for him now, and he didn't have those before. And my understanding of Francis' whole perspective and situation is it was less about the money and more about the opportunity to do the things that he wants to do. And he couldn't do those, and the UFC would never allow those. They're saying they offered him more money than they've offered anyone in their organization's history. He would have been the highest
heavyweight
paid,
division, he said.
Highest paid, yeah, heavyweight.
So
that's true. It's not anybody that's heavyweight specific. There
I have a feeling that if you
make more money, Conor McGregor certainly made his money. But to sit there and say, yes, we made an offer of bigger money, it's like, okay, fine. But that wasn't what he said he wanted. He's maintained that publicly all this time. And so, I mean, I don't know where you think he's going to end up, or if you have any preference of where he ends up or what he ends up doing next or what have you. But I would have to think, fighting wise, he'll pretty much just go whichever one throws the most money at him from an MMA organization standpoint, because they will give him what he wants. Bellator will give him what he wants. They'll say, you want a box? That's fine. We'll do anything to get your services and acquire the best heavyweight in the world. PFL, they'll do the same thing.
So let me ask you this question before I answer your thing about where Francis is going to end up here. If Dana and the UFC wanted to co-promote like they did with Maymac, that required Dana to work with Steven Espinoza to an extent. And at the time,
that's something he's not looking forward to either.
At the time, the relationship wasn't sour until after that run had really happened, right?
Sure.
Like, I think that was what really soured their relationship, was having to co-promote on Maymac. Would this require Dana to co-promote with Bob Arum? Because I know that they really don't get along.
Oh, that wouldn't happen.
Well, that's
There's
what I'm
no
asking.
way
Is that
happen.
why Tyson Fury isn't Bob Arum his promoter?
Tyson Fury, I'm not as big on the boxing world. I'm not really sure who his promoter is. I could have swore it was Eddie Hearn, but I could be wrong.
It might be Eddie.
I
I think Eddie Hearn and Dana also don't get along. So,
are you noticing the pattern yet?
Yeah, it's that thing of if you think everybody's an asshole, it turns out that there's actually one asshole in this equation.
Mm-hmm.
It's you. Which we also kind of had an inclination if you listen to our last episode.
Oh, no, I believe actually. So Eddie Hearn's with Joshua, or Joshua's with Eddie Hearn, Anthony Joshua, not Fury, because that fight would have been made already if that was the case. Yeah, I can't honestly. It's too Byzantine, the boxing world for me. It
is very
don't
difficult
follow it
to
as I used to.
So the whole reason I was saying that is because why couldn't the UFC do a co-promotion like they did it with Maymac? That made them a lot of money. This would have made them a ton of money. I'm sure that Endeavor would have been like, hell yeah, let's rake in a lot more cash, because UFC has been kind of this golden goose for them, especially starting in the pandemic. But doing that would lower the value of Zuffa boxing. Hey, we're ready to turn boxing on its head. We're going to change the world of boxing forever by selling t-shirts.
I would say
that are now
the boxing world
items.
has been turned on its head waiting for Zuffa boxing. It is now asleep. Because when I turn my head at night, I'm, horizontal.
So moving closer towards what this means for Francis and the UFC. If I told you at the start of 2022, so just over a year ago,
mm-hmm.
that by mid-January 2023, Francis Ngannou, Kamaru Usman, Israel Adesanya, none of them would be champions in the UFC anymore. And Nate Diaz and Francis Ngannou would no longer even be with the UFC. You would probably because were those the three? I mean, 3 of the 4 pound for pound fighters, right? Those 3 champions. I mean, what was it? Alexander Volkanovski rounding out the top 4 there.
Yeah.
So yeah, 3 of the top 4 pound for pound, and at that point we were like, oh man, both Kamaru Usman and Israel Adesanya were kind of starting to enter the divisional GOAT conversations, right? I know people still yourself included are still oh yeah, GSP was
very
far and
much.
away
It's
the
kind
GOAT.
of it's almost an untouchable legacy, but yeah.
But Kamaru was starting to kind of enter that conversation. All right, maybe he's a couple defenses away from kind of matching GSP's greatness. And then Israel Adesanya, he had a few more defenses he had to reach before he started kind of sniffing Anderson Silva. But that aside,
I mean,
2 completely dominant champions and one guy who looked like he was just going to put anybody to sleep that stepped into the octagon with him.
Sure.
And then Francis, what happens with him happens with him. And then Israel Adesanya and Kamaru Usman both lose in the final round of their fights that they were winning. And, now Nate Diaz and Francis Ngannou are no longer even with the promotion.
Well, I mean, we're talking about what's kind of equates to a 5-fight parlay here, where we're expecting all 3 of these champions to still be here and that these 2 individuals will still be in the organization. It's hard to hit a 5-fight parlay. So, no, I mean, I wouldn't have said that those exact circumstances would have occurred, but I'm honestly just not surprised that we've gotten here with Francis Ngannou. I kind of understood a lot of the writing on the wall as it comes to the contractual situation. There used to be, and there still is to some degree, the champions clause, right? So the champions clause kind of kicks in when you become the champion, extend your contract. But now, as I understand it from the reporting of John S. Nash, who's on social media, works for Bloody Elbow, he does an incredible job of understanding these UFC contracts and trying to get that information out to people. So he's somebody that people ought to really be able to keep an eye on. He's been talking about this for well over a year, and because I am familiar with his work and read his work, I understood there was a real chance that the contract being extended was only, I think it was for like 18 months or 3 fights or something like that. You check with John's reporting on that one. But nonetheless, I knew that the sunset of this contract was going to be January 2023. And sure enough, here we are. So I am in no way surprised that 1, he is no longer the champion, and 2, he is gone, because honestly, I thought they'd take the championship away from him sooner, to be perfectly honest. Just,
I mean,
if they wanted to say, oh, he was inactive, they had done that before. They'd done it earlier. After he won the championship, they had a new interim belt 4 months later. They could not wait to get rid of that. And I always thought that was a mistake.
I did too.
And not just in the sense of like the brand and everything like that, but like it didn't. I just don't think it was the right. If you wanted to do that interim belt thing, and you knew that there was a potential contract situation here, and it did seem different than other ones. Now they're in the room; they know more than we do. Let's be perfectly honest. They understand the situation better in a lot of ways, but I don't know if they. I think they underestimated Francis and his side and his desires, his beliefs, and all that. So I think there's an element to that, but. Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. I am surprised that I'm not even that surprised that Nate Diaz is gone, but I am surprised that Kamaru Usman especially is no longer the champion today. He's the one that I would have said you had to, if you out of those 5 scenarios that you kind of put out there, the one that I would have said, well, this is going to happen. This is the best chance to happen. It would have been Usman still the champ, and that obviously didn't happen.
Yeah, it's just been a wild stretch here for both champion turnover and fighters kind of leaving the organization. And, now we may have 2 of the biggest free agents of all time on the market in Francis Ngannou and Nate Diaz. I mean, who else recent memory has been as big as them? Maybe Chris Cyborg? Like when the UFC kind of said,
Fedor.
all right, we're done being...
Fedor.
I mean, how long ago was that at this point?
It was a long time ago, but he was the biggest free agent I think that MMA had ever had up until this point.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Recent memory. I would say, like,
I don't know. I remember it, so whatever.
That's got. Yeah, but we're old.
It's
but
true.
I'm saying, like, top 3. Is that the top 3 right there? Chris Cyborg, Nate Diaz, and Francis Ngannou is like, we'll say, like, the last 5 years of free agency.
I think you have to put Kayla Harrison in there.
Yeah,
she was a highly desirable free agent.
I guess I kind of glanced over her because she re-signed.
No, well, she re-signed because her contract had to be matched, or it was able to be matched. So she didn't really have a choice in the matter. I'm pretty sure she would today be a Bellator fighter and probably would have already fought Chris Cyborg by now if she had had the opportunity. Now, hindsight being what it is, would that fight have gone her way? I don't know. Maybe she wasn't ready for that one. Who knows? Maybe she is. Maybe it's just the matchup that we certainly had here in Larissa Pachenko, and it didn't go that way. But I don't know. Nonetheless, that's where I think she would have been. And she was definitely courting. All 3 major organizations were courting her. The UFC wanted her. They just wanted her their own rate, which was not close to what the other.
Dana probably wanted her to fight Dana probably wanted her to fight in the Contender Series or some shit.
I'll give him more credit than that, but only in that respect. But yeah, I think Bellator definitely wanted her, and I believe that was an offer that was just matched, like straight matched, and obviously PFL wanted her because they kept her.
Yeah,
I would put her. I would honestly say of all the free agents before this last few months with Nate and Francis, I think she was the biggest free agent to come along in a long time.
So let me ask you this: now that we're in the era where both Nate Diaz and Francis Ngannou are free agents, who do you think, 1, has the most to gain from signing either of them, and 2, is the best fit for either of them?
I would say the one who has the most, honestly, it's hard to say because both Bellator and PFL, and those are the only organizations that I think we really entertain for the purpose of this particular conversation. Both of them would obviously gain a massive amount. In Bellator's case, it would give them a legitimate number one in the world fighter that they've truly never actually had in the male divisions. Again, they have Cyborg. You can make the argument she's the best 45er. She obviously lost to Amanda Nunes, so there's that, but at least she's a very active 45er, and we don't really have that in Amanda Nunes anymore. So that's where the debate kind of comes in, right? But as far as the male divisions, they've never had somebody who was like, not just, hey, maybe they're number one, like you could make a case for them being number one. Francis Ngannou, if they signed him, they'd have the top heavyweight in the world. No, full stop. No questions asked. And that would give them a very big chip to hold over an organization like PFL, which is it's very much gunning for that number 2 spot. You ask anyone in PFL, they're the number 2 organization in the world. I would say they're not there yet. I think they want to be. I think they're trying hard to sell that. And sometimes that just works in MMA. You can just tell people and eventually they'll believe it, right? If no one else is saying anything otherwise, eventually they just kind of buy into that.
One championship says they're the number 1 organization.
Well, they are the number 1 organization in terms of organizations that are called one. So honestly, it's hard to debate that. I couldn't even argue against that. So so that's Bellator's side. PFL, if they were to get Francis, obviously they get the same thing, but also that really in the conscious of a lot of people would I think make them leapfrog Bellator and really start to challenge not just public perception that they're trying to put out there, but actually could result in bigger numbers and that kind of thing, and almost start to lead to maybe even a big. I don't think it would go this way yet, but man, it could be even the beginning of the end of Bellator if that was to happen. So yeah, I mean, there's stakes on both sides, but I
think PFL honestly has the most to gain, and I'll tell you why. One, we talked about already. They're on ESPN Plus, which is something that is a huge leg up because anybody who's an MMA fan who at least has an interest in the UFC and like wants to watch things legally has an ESPN Plus subscription. So they already have their foot in the door with PFL. They can turn on ESPN Plus on like a random like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, whenever they end up doing their things and be like, oh, there's a PFL on. I'll watch that. 2, they just announced this signing of Jake Paul, which, follow me here for a second.
I'm following.
That's going to get some mainstream eyes on it that wouldn't otherwise watch. And then when if they were to say, hey, like we've just started like this pay-per-view division that they've talked about where it's like, all right, Kayla Harrison, Jake Paul. And now if you can add Francis Ngannou and or Nate Diaz into that, that is instantly going to bolster that. And like, they're also, to round it out, they are also, I think, on the cusp of overtaking Bellator. And it's like an argument, right? Like I think Bellator's still probably a little bit ahead of them.
Right. However, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
If they got Francis Ngannou and or Nate Diaz, they have a very, very good argument to being the number 2 organization with a bullet.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying too. I would say though, if you're a consumer of the fights at home, you should be rooting for Francis Ngannou to go to Bellator because they won't necessarily put Francis Ngannou on pay-per-view. Yeah, you would have to be potentially a Showtime subscriber, although they are now having their breakthrough on CBS finally this in just a couple weeks. So there are paths for Francis Ngannou, the top heavyweight fighter in the world, to be available to you without paying $50 a month, or if he'd stay in the UFC, $80 a month. And if PFL, he's going right to pay-per-view. He is not going to do their season. That would just be the goofiest idea ever. They won't do that. He'll be part of their pay-per-view super fight, whatever they call it. It's a stupid name. But he'll be a part of their pay-per-view stable. You will only be able to pay to watch him.
Oh my God. It just hit me like, imagine if PFL was able to get like a 1-fight deal for this pay-per-view super fight promotion, like sign Francis Ngannou and then get a 1-fight deal with Mariusz Pudzianowski. Francis Ngannou versus the Puds. That is my most anticipated fight of the year now. True. That is my dream come true at this point. Like, just two people who look like action figures, and one of them is the former UFC heavyweight champion. And easily,
one would certainly beat the other, I would think.
I think so, but like
it shouldn't be that hard.
You know, our question of like, is this pay-per-view card worth X amount of dollars? I don't care what they're charging. The answer is yes.
And you're somebody who, if I recall last year, you didn't actually pay the money for Francis Ngannou versus Cyril Gane. Am I wrong?
I did not, because I was also, I forget what my reasoning was, but it was because it was also Brandon Moreno versus Figueiredo. Was that one, or
was that on the same card? Yeah, I think so.
I forget what my reasoning was. It was something about not wanting to give UFC my money, which, is a persistent thing at this point.
Look, on that moral stance, I would understand, but man, I mean, I still maintain that was a fight card that was worth it.
Yeah, in retrospect, I think it kind of was, because I think I was like underwhelmed by like the other fights on the card or something. I don't know. But
so after those two fights, because yes, those were the two title fights on the card. The rest of the main card was Michel Pereira against Andre Fialho, and Said Nurmagomedov, Cody Stamann, and Michael Morales against Trevin Giles. So yes, it wasn't necessarily the sexiest names, although Morales, young prospect, had a nice finish in the first round of Giles, and then you had a very quick 47-second submission from a Nurmagomedov, not the Nurmagomedov, but a Nurmagomedov.
Sure, and it's. I don't know. I think that I'm excited to see where Francis ends up, and wherever he goes, I hope it means he's making a lot more money than he was making in the UFC, and I hope he gets the main thing that he seems to have wanted, which was respect.
Respect, and especially the opportunity to box. He really just wants to box. So I hope he gets the Tyson Fury fight just for his own sake. I'm curious about it. I think it's a fascinating thing. He is not going to beat Tyson Fury in a boxing match. I even know that going in, and I still want to watch it.
In all likelihood,
I'm curious what's going to happen.
In all likelihood, that matchup is going to be even worse, like at least less competitive than Maymac.
Definitely so.
Because Tyson Fury is just a monster. And I know Francis Ngannou is a monster in the realm of MMA, but take him against the best heavyweight boxer alive right now, and it's going to be a rough night at the office.
I just think it'd be fascinating to do. I say why not throw this out there? If we can have this rare opportunity to put number one boxer against number one fighter, I don't care which sport it is. I'm up for it. And I think it would be neat if they actually agreed to, the kind of, I'll call it the Jake Paul special, we'll box and then 6 months later we'll do MMA, because that's the offer he's thrown at basically any name who has become remotely available. Did the same thing to Nate, did the same thing here to Francis Ngannou, who would honestly, like, no commission should actually okay that one. There's way too much weight between the two of them.
Oh my God.
It would be healthy.
I worry, though, about, Francis Ngannou, if he goes up against Tyson Fury, he's not going to win, and he's going to make a boatload of money. However, I don't think if he gets, finished, the way Conor got finished against Floyd, I don't think it's going to be a standing TKO. I think it might be he's on the mat, laying down and opening his eyes, wondering what happened. Because
and that's
Tyson
fine.
Fury,
I think he's capable. He's not someone who I say the commission shouldn't allow to fight, because I think he has made his money with his hands, in particular in the UFC.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even like he's using the elbows and stuff very often. Realistically, he's winning because of his massive power in his hands. Now, he's not a boxer. I'm sure he's training boxing. I have no doubt about that. He's not going to beat the best boxer in the world. If any puncher was going to beat the best boxer in the world, it was going to be Deontay Wilder. And he had, was it now 3 chances? Or is it just 2? I can't remember.
I think it was just 2.
Is it 2? Well, I think they're contractually, there might be the chance of it being a 3rd. But
yeah,
certainly that one I do not want again. But yeah, I'm all aboard for this. So that's what I really want to see him do next. Although my preference would be the special rules fight, where it's 1 round boxing. Start with boxing, that's fine. 3-round boxing round, and then 3-round MMA round, and keep alternating. Just do, I don't know, 5 rounds or something like that.
The corner has 1 minute to change their gloves in between rounds.
Yeah, whatever.
But yeah, I almost want him to go to the PFL just to give them more smoke to this fire that they seem to have started building in recent years, where it's like, you know, they really seem like they're building some momentum with like a lot of the signings that they're doing lately. And, you know, like, you were one of the kind of evangelists of that pay-per-view after it happened. I mean, a lot of people in the MMA media were like, hey, this is actually an amazing card that happened, like, in retrospect.
Hindsight being what it was actually an entertaining card. But if I was, let's put it this way, if I was not given a code to watch this from PFL and I was not in the media and I didn't need to cover it, I probably would not have paid $50 for it.
Sure.
Even you know, knowing what it was, like if you told me, listen, you're actually going to get your money's worth here, there's going to be some real interesting surprises here, I'd say, okay, maybe I would think about it, but you can't promise that. So,
but I mean, in recent years, they have signed, like, and just in the last year, they've signed Shane Burgos, Marlon Moraes, which, you know, talk about guys who have kind of some parallels to Cam Newton, where like, oh, he's going to be champion. Don't worry.
You know what? I'm going to say Marlon Moraes is my guy, actually. I'm glad you put that name out there. He's someone who I thought, okay, he didn't beat Henry this time, but he'll get back there. And he has never been the same fighter again. That's the number one, I think, for me.
For sure. And, you know, Jake Paul, say what you want about him. He has built a huge name for himself in combat sports, for better and for worse. And
with Jake Paul, though, I kind of want to interject a bit here. When they signed Jake Paul, they not only did they get a fighter and like a well-known commodity, they got somebody who's going to market for them.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's like it's almost part of your marketing budget goes into there in a different way, and it's kind of it's almost like a 2-in-1, because you wouldn't say the same thing about if they signed Francis Ngannou or even Nate Diaz. These are guys; they're just fighters. Like they're not changing the way your message gets out there to different people and that kind of thing. And Jake actually does do that, I would say.
Though Nate Diaz does have a massive following. Like,
I'm not saying he doesn't, but I just don't think it's the same. You know, he's not a promoter. You know, yeah, maybe he wants to be one day, but like he's not a promoter. Jake Paul is most definitely a promoter. He is a carnival barker, and that kind of thing cannot be underestimated.
For sure. Yeah,
I'm still surprised that you're saying PFL, though, because honestly, you're saying to yourself, I would rather have him go there so I can pay $50 to watch him instead of just have a Showtime subscription.
I'm just talking purely from the standpoint of like where I think the best competition is going to be and where the most interesting matchups are going to happen. And like reading the tea leaves a little bit here of like, you know, Bellator has kind of been like more or less treading water over these last couple of years in terms of like growth and momentum and like what they're doing with the organization. PFL is at least trying some cool stuff. You know, Bellator's tried their Grand Prix to, you know, mixed results. I think that featherweight Grand Prix was the pinnacle of that concept. And I don't know if we're really ever going to see that high again, where, you know, AJ McKee kind of soars through the ranks, takes down Patricio Pitbull in a really climactic clash against these guys. Like, I don't know if we're ever going to reach that pinnacle again. The lightweight Grand Prix does look amazing on the Bellator side. However, PFL has been making big moves. They've been poaching big names from the UFC, and they've been trying to make things happen. And as a result, I think that it would be a great home, at least for Nate Diaz. I don't know if Francis Ngannou is going to go there as well, but like, could you imagine if they raked in both those guys?
Yeah. I mean, that's it. The problem is if you go over to PFL, if you get Nate Diaz over there, he kind of has to fight Jake Paul, because there's not an interesting fight over there. And that's not even being disrespectful to some of the fighters at like 170 pounds, 155 pounds. I think they've got good, interesting fighters there, but it's not remotely the same. You need Nate to have something with a little spice in there. And I don't think they have that on the roster except for Jake Paul. So once that's done, what then? Hey, I think heavyweight, though, there's a chance that, kind of like you're saying, we're almost reading the tea leaves, that there is a chance that they might find a way to get some more interesting heavyweight talent over there, because there are going to be guys who want to fight the best in the world, and PFL will pay them for that right to do so. So, you know, it could be champions from other organizations. Who knows? Maybe some guys whose contracts will run out in the UFC will just say, you know, who are not maybe at the top of the UFC but are close. They might peel off and say, maybe I can test free agency and actually fight the best in the world over there.
Do you remember how the BMF title got set up how Nate Diaz took the microphone, saw Jorge Masvidal in the crowd, and said, he had a good performance. He's a gangster, but he ain't no West Coast gangster. He could do the same thing. Be like, hey, there's that guy. He's the Canadian gangster. He ain't no West Coast gangster. Olivier Aubin
You are stretching
Mercier.
this, sir. You are stretching this.
I'm just saying, he's got gangster right in his nickname.
Yeah, sure.
And he's the defending champion. He is the defending champion.
Yeah.
Make it happen.
True. Yeah. We'll have fun with that. Good luck with that. But yeah, so I would say we should probably move on to some of the other fights. Like, we should at least look to what happened last week or on Saturday. Yep. We should look to this Saturday. There's still a lot going on in the MMA world from an in-cage perspective too, right? I think we got the bigger stuff out of the way.
Yeah,
so let's just kind of wrap up a little bit with, or not wrap up, but let's talk a little more about UFC Vegas 67 with Strickland and Imavov. You did watch. What did you think of this event in general? I mean, how did it fare against your expectations?
It was better than my expectations. I think I gave the card a 1.5 last week because
you were very down on it. Yeah.
I was also very down on the UFC as a concept.
That's true. Yeah. So maybe that colored your,
I think
your perspective a bit.
Yeah. When the guy in charge is doing what he was doing, it's hard to
slapping his wife. We can say that.
Yes. But I think two names emerged as the most impressive for me. One was Dan Ige. He came back from needing a much-needed win here after losing 3 straight to Chan Sung Jung, Josh Emmett, and Movsar Evloev. Now he's back.
All killers in this division.
Killers,
yeah.
But still, like, Dan Ige, at a moment there, he looked like he maybe had some championship potential. And then, of course, like, Calvin Kattar stopped or, lost. He beat him. He stopped the momentum. He didn't stop Dan Ige. Nobody's ever stopped Dan Ige.
Sure.
But he was really rising up the ranks. Calvin Kattar, obviously another killer, beats him. He gets a comeback win against Gavin Tucker, and then loses 3 straight. Which that's a hard pill to swallow when you're a contender on the rise, looking like you might have a title contention ceiling.
I mean, he got close enough, but for some reason I just never really saw him breaking through that level. But you're right, he was getting to the point where not that many more wins would have gotten there.
And he looked great against Damon Jackson. Like, Damon Jackson is a game fighter, and he Damon Jackson, he looked good in moments, but Dan Ige, this was his fight. The odds in this fight were actually really close, and I didn't really understand that one. I like Damon Jackson. I actually think Damon Jackson's a pretty solid. He's really come around and really found himself after kind of a rougher start at the UFC level. He had to go back to the regional level and come back. But it didn't seem like, how I'm saying, okay, not Francis Ngannou. He's still on my mind. Dan Ige wasn't quite championship caliber, even if he was close enough to it. I think almost this is the same thing with Damon Jackson. Damon Jackson, he got hot. He's got some wins under his belt, but I never thought he was going to break into that contender level that kind of Dan Ige was almost the gatekeeper to. So this didn't surprise me at all, but the knockout itself was super awesome. I mean, he just floors him with, it was a right. It was like a hook, right? Or was it a left hook? It was a left hook.
Left hook. Thank you. It's been a lot of things are happening these days, right? That punch and then just to walk off coolly like that and not put out any more damage. It always, I'm a sucker for one punch KOs and walk off KOs especially.
You must be a big Mark Hunt fan.
Yeah, he's fun. He brings the violence. He takes a lot of punches. He throws one. You're down. And he's done.
Meanwhile, Francis Ngannou, he will just punch you until the referee says, "No, please stop. You're going to kill this man." Remember poor Stipe?
Yeah, I mean, you fight till someone pulls you off. That's okay.
100%. 100%. And actually, there's the other guy that impressed me a huge amount. I mean, it was somebody who was already pretty high in my books. Umar Nurmagomedov.
Oh yeah,
he had that kind of like killer instinct where like he followed Hayani Barcelos to the ground, delivered a devastating hammer fist to the completely unconscious guy, and then he had this thing where he goes, "Oh, this guy is basically dead right now in my arm."
Like, sorry, I didn't mean to do that.
He cradled his head.
A lot of humanity in there. Yeah,
he saw the way the head bounced off the mat. as he delivered that hammer fist, and he was like, "Oh wait, no."
I feel like
I'm sorry.
speaks. I feel like that what that moment reveals about fighters is that when they're in those situations, they really can't sometimes divorce themselves from what's going on in that moment. So like if they're throwing that extra punch that may not have any malice to it, even if you can absolutely 100% tell that other fighter is out, because they might just not be there in that moment in the same way that you and I are. So if they throw it, I try to give them leeway, because when you see this, it's like immediately he's just like, oh no, I didn't want to do, like, I don't want to hurt you. Like most of them are not trying to hurt one another. And I would bet you, even, depends what this man would say here, but Dan Henderson and Michael Bisping, the infamous nail in the coffin that he throws after knocking out Michael Bisping. Now he says, he's kind of playing into, of course, the whole idea of, maybe one more to shut him up and that kind of thing. I don't know that he necessarily meant to do that. I don't know that he didn't, but I think there's some ambiguity there is all I would say.
Yeah, Umar Nurmagomedov seemed like he was just kind of in kill mode. And then when he came to, basically realizing that, like, oh, this is a person who I have knocked out and they are not defending themselves, I should probably make sure they're not going to sustain permanent brain damage here. But yeah, he is a problem for that bantamweight division.
There are a lot of good, like, when people talk about bantamweight is like the best division, I would say the top of lightweight is the best. But then you account for not just like the depth of the contenders, but the depth of the prospects at bantamweight, and it starts to look really staggeringly good.
And then when you look at the bantamweight division, and there are 2 ranked fighters named Nurmagomedov, there's a problem. They're coming.
I would want to not fight Nurmagomedovs. Any fighter with Magomed anywhere in their name is a problem. It's just like it's an automatic.
Yeah,
name a fighter out there who had Magomed somewhere in their name, and you said, they didn't have a very good career.
Yeah, well, I mean, really anybody from like that region, like Dagestan is.
Oh, sure. I mean, we've had fighters that. Well, I mean, our main event fighter here, Nasruddin Imavov, he's Dagestani, but he is from France now. He grew up in France. I believe he moved there when he was like 10 or something like that. So largely grew up in a different country, but is nonetheless ethnically so. But yeah, so that's why he's like a very different fighter here. I think we should talk about the main event here, right? Because how did that fare against, when I say this, let's account for the fact that, you did not expect Nasruddin Imavov to be fighting Sean Strickland, but once that fight was made, you probably made some expectations in your head about how good or bad that fight would be. How did it fare against those?
So I think I gave Gastelum Imavov a 2 out of 5.
That sounds right.
I would have given Strickland Imavov a 1.5. And
okay.
I think it fared better than my expectations. I think Strickland was a lot more suffocating in his pressure, and he just kind of
didn't feel as much like a chess match. Yeah,
exactly. Like, he was pressing forward. And Imavov just in large spurts seemed like he didn't know how to solve the puzzle. It was interesting. It almost, and very different fighters and very different fights, but it almost reminded me of when Colby Covington was fighting Robbie Lawler, and he was just kind of forward pressuring him. Lawler was always on his back feet, and it just didn't seem like Lawler or Imavov in this case really had a solution for the majority of the fight.
Yeah, I would say that's probably fair. I do think, both of them were able to get their licks in, and I would say Strickland Imavov probably landed the 2 best punches of the fight, I think, and I want to say both of them were in the second round, actually. So he was definitely competitive in this fight, and I don't know that there was a round where you said, oh man, he's really getting pieced up. I think round 4 was a pretty solid round for Strickland, if I recall. And then round 5, he ended up not winning because I think he was starting to gas to a degree, and he
was holding up such a pace.
Yeah. It was a tough one, but no, Strickland certainly looked better out there. But God, I'm really getting sick of this. Can we just get over the idea of Sean Strickland being some sort of homicidal maniac when he gets in the cage? Like, he fights like a smart fighter. He's all these thoughts of homicidal thoughts, all the stuff that I like to say in the lead up to the fight to try and get you to watch. It's like, man, this doesn't match what you actually do. At some point, you're overpromising. And I think people are going to catch up to it. And if they haven't already, they're going to say, okay, this is a Sean Strickland fight. I know this is going 5 rounds, and maybe it'll be okay, but it might not be all that interesting.
It's like I said when he fought Alex Pereira, and I said this was the one time that his strategy in the cage and his pre-fight trash talk matched up perfectly because they were both dumb as shit.
Yeah, that's about right.
But honestly, Sean Strickland, if he didn't trash talk so much in the lead up, like not even trash talk, 'cause you can trash talk, whatever. Like you can say like, all right, I'm going to beat this guy, whatever.
That's how it goes.
However, if he wasn't like, I'm going to kill a guy in the octagon and whatever,
I think it's not that he is going to, it's that he wants to. There's a desire to murder somebody in the octagon.
If he didn't say stuff like that leads you to believe he's going to be like going out there for blood, I don't think people would think he was such a boring fighter.
Yeah, I think it might still anyway, but yeah, there's expectations he builds in and then undermines them. So yeah, I think you're right to at least a point.
Yeah, and honestly, this wasn't a bad fight. It wasn't a boring fight. I was engaged throughout most of it, and I was like, and Imavov also seemed like, he could have been a solid strike or two away from changing the course of the fight, because all he really needed to do at some point, outside of that round 2 where he did land a couple of really good strikes, he needed to gain some respect from Strickland. He just was not able to do that, and that's what enabled Strickland to keep on that forward pressure and keep pressing Imavov back and not allowing Imavov to really pick up any kind of momentum.
One thing I've observed too about Strickland in general is obviously, this is not a secret, he's a striker, right? This is where he would prefer the fight to be, mostly a puncher, really. But he mixed in a takedown in this fight. He mixed in some kicks, so there was some dimension to his offense in this particular fight. Having said that, he is not a knockout artist by any means. He's not even usually going to get you death by 1,000 cuts. Like, maybe you'll get the 1,000 cuts, but you're going to make it the distance without a whole lot of, separation from consciousness or close to it. And it's hard for a fighter like that to get to the championship. When we have guys who are winning decisions at this level, that are only winning decisions, they're not typically because of striking. Usually it's because of, maybe they're standout wrestling. They're really dominating guys on the ground. That's the type of thing that tends to get you over the top to get to the championship level. And he doesn't do that. If he can't knock anybody out at middleweight, I would say he'll never fight for the title unless they're just out of options. Like if Adesanya wins the belt and no one else is ready, then maybe he comes back and maybe he emerges, right? But other than that, man, I don't see him getting there. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, you really have to have like that trademark win, and he just doesn't have that yet.
Absolutely.
Something that people think about when they think of your name. The Francis Ngannou knocking out Alistair Overeem in the way that he did, that was like, okay, that guy is the next title contender and probably the next champion. Obviously, he was not the next champion in the sense that his next fight against Stipe Miocic didn't go super well. However, he did eventually come back and he won that belt. But like everybody, when they think of, it's almost like when you think of Alistair Overeem, you think of that Francis Ngannou knockout at this point, which sucks because Alistair Overeem had such an illustrious career. But,
yes,
Sean Strickland does not have a big win that people like when they think of Sean Strickland, they usually think of kind of like the way that he fights, and it's not typically in a positive light, or they think of his trash talk, which again, not in a super positive light. So he needs a way that he can just be like, okay, that is what that guy can do in the octagon. And it's just like a moment in time that everybody has imprinted on their brain, and he's just not there yet.
I think probably we're starting to really decide what he can do in the octagon, and it's honestly not all that entertaining. It's high level in its own way. I mean, he really got to this point because a lot of his striking is just not what you typically see, and that throws a lot of people off. There's a talent in there. There's an ability in there, but we know that he's not going to go in there and thrill you. We're not paying money because, man, he's going to entertain the heck out of us. We're not tuning in because he's going to entertain the heck out of us. We're turning into this main event because it was the last main event or the first main event we had in a month, and people there was a hunger for that, and that was pretty much it.
We were tuning into this as the main event because it just happened to be the final fight on the card.
Just some fights, right?
Yep.
Like CME says.
So, let me ask you one thing before we move on from this card, because I did not watch the prelims. I only watched the main card here.
Right.
I was interested in the return of Jimmy Flick because, this is a guy who retired and now he is back. This was his first fight back, and it seems like it didn't go super well for him.
No, it didn't, and that's not a surprise. It's been a couple years since he fought. That's a hard thing to do, to jump in there, especially against someone like Charles Johnson. Energy is a really tough fighter. He's on the come up at flyweight. It didn't set up well for him. I think Jimmy Flick can still compete in the UFC. I don't know where that is. It's hard to really make that call right now, but this was not set up as a good fight for him.
No, and it
played out that way.
I was kind of rooting for him, even though I didn't have a chance to watch his fight. Like, it just, you like a good comeback story, right?
Sure, absolutely. And it sounds like he's all about his girls, that he shouts out his little girls all the time. He loves them, and as a parent myself, obviously I relate pretty strongly to that. No surprise there, but yeah, it's fight sport is cruel, man.
Yeah, so I think we need to spin this ahead to the fight card this weekend, which is UFC
Absolutely,
283.
Yeah, and we're watching our time tick away here, sir. We can't go crazy on this one because we got to get over to the other side as well. But yeah, the big deal is the fights coming up this weekend. This is much more interesting than what we had going forward, although it's still a little weird because, yeah, we've got Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill. The 205 title is on the line again as they try to crown the vacant belts, which right now, by the way, there is no heavyweight champion and no light heavyweight champion in the UFC.
That is true.
That is what we have right now. The heaviest champion that they have is their middleweight champion, Alex Pereira.
Just
Pereira,
make him the honorary light heavyweight and heavyweight champion.
I mean, more or less, he right?
As of this recording, Francis Ngannou is still on the UFC website, and I know they update their rankings on Tuesdays, but
sometimes they'll just yank him out, though.
Does that mean that Alex Pereira is the baddest man on the planet? Because
it means Francis Ngannou is wherever he goes.
Hey, I'm just saying.
No.
They always say the heaviest UFC champion, baddest man on the planet.
I mean, that was true for a period of time. That period of time has now ended. They divorced themselves from it, and that's their choice. Then the other title we have is, it is January, and it's UFC pay-per-view, which means the annual Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno title fight at 125 pounds. This is the fourth time we've had them fight, the second year in a row in which they fight in January. We referenced that earlier with the Ngannou-Gane fight. Is the question we have to ask is the one we always ask here with these pay-per-views. And now, it being an extra $5, is this worth your $80 to watch this main card, which also features, and I'll just name check the fights off pretty quickly right now as well. We have Gilbert Burns against Neil Magny. We have Jessica Andrade against Lauren Murphy. And we have Paul Craig against Johnny Walker. Is this worth $80 to you?
It's so hard because I've been thinking a lot about it because of the extra $5 bump. And it's like, all right, what card to me is worth my $80? And like, this card is actually pretty good. Like, Gilbert Burns, Neil Magny, that's a really good fight. Jessica Andrade, I always love watching her fight. Paul Craig versus Johnny Walker, that should be fun, if nothing else. Like, I think that's going to be a fun way to kick off the pay-per-view card. But I don't know, like, what is worth $80 to me. I think that's actually what my exact argument was this time last year. That's probably what it was they had once again raised the pay-per-view price that time to $75. And I was like, you know what? If you're going to raise the price, you got to give me a better freaking card than what they gave me underneath that Ngannou-Gane and Moreno Figueiredo card, or the fights.
Sure.
And we talked about that at the top of the show. This is a much better card, but it's also a more expensive card. So it's like, all right, well, what's the calculation here? What do I have to take into account? I think that this is worth me finding a bar nearby and going and sitting at the bar and ordering a couple of beers over the course of a pay-per-view card.
I've got to be honest. I don't know why you don't just do that literally every time. I would always save my money.
I'll tell you why, because I looked up UFC.com/bars for bars that were showing the fights. There's like one bar in my area, and I live in a major metropolitan area.
I live in a different area.
I live in a major metropolitan area. There's like one bar and two movie theaters that are showing the fights. And I'm like,
have you ever gone to the movie theater, by the way?
I haven't.
I recommend it. I watched, this was years back. I watched Anderson Silva against Nick Diaz at the movie theater. That was also a January pay-per-view, by the way. 8 years ago this month. And that was a cool experience. I actually recommend it.
Was that a January? I thought that was a February.
No, it was January.
Okay. I will take your word for it as the professional working in this space. Yeah, like I'm seriously considering making the trek to the movie theater that is showing it near me.
Highly encourage it, especially because you're on the fence here and you don't know what you want to do, but you actually do kind of want to watch these fights.
Absolutely want to watch these. And also, the prelims have a lot of really great fights too. I'm excited to see Terrence McKinney return. Gregory Rodriguez, that's great.
I mean, those fights you obviously don't have to pay extra
for.
You get them with your ESPN Plus subscription, which I know you're also on the fence with.
Yeah, because those cowards still haven't made a statement. I don't care. We just produce the content. Or we just distribute the content. Who cares? You're in business with them. It's the coward's way out that they're taking. They're hoping it all blows over, and it's just it's very frustrating.
By the way, if it helps you, that Anderson Silva Nick Diaz fight, that was January 31st.
Okay, so
technically
right.
speaking, it kind of, at least for the East Coast viewer such as myself, it did cross over into February, but it started the event in January, and local time it was January. So very, very close.
Yeah, maybe I'll try and seek out the movie theater that is showing it.
I hope you do, because then we can talk about that experience too. You can kind of review that experience of watching it there. But nonetheless, I mean, seriously, I would highly recommend whenever you're able to just go to a bar and watch it and save your money. So that's what when I was just a fan, really, that's what I was doing. I was going to the bars and I was watching them because it was more prevalent then. First off, it was at kind of the peak of the UFC fervor, I think, which you could probably argue it's probably a more profitable organization right now. I'm sure the UFC's happy with their returns, but I would say there was a fever for the UFC for a while, and that has kind of died down because it has now become part of the mainstream sporting landscape, and people just kind of take it for granted now. And before it was a lot more interesting. So yeah, but I would go to Applebee's, I would go to wherever, and I would just watch the fights, and it was easy. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. And if you went to Applebee's, dude, at least where I was, you didn't even have to. All you had to do, they just wanted you to order something. So I would order like a soda or a half price appetizer or something like that. So I would get out of there with, food in my belly and drink, because I don't drink alcohol, and I would be satisfied, and I probably paid less than $10, and I got to watch the fights. It was great.
Yeah, I used to do that as well, but I eventually became the part of all right, I got to drive all the way out there. I got to get ready. I got to order food. I'm usually, if I'm going to a restaurant or a bar to watch the fights, I'm going to probably get some food, and then I'll probably get a couple drinks or whatever, because, you're just sitting there.
You have to account for that.
And I'm like, okay, well, at the time I had a partner who was watching the UFC and interested in it too. And it's all right, if we both order dinner and drinks, we're going to be at least $80 in the hole, probably.
So it's cheaper to watch at home.
Let's just stay home and we'll heat up a frozen pizza.
Yeah.
So that
makes sense.
Now that I would be going by myself to watch these fights, it's probably, or going with friends, maybe, I don't know. It's probably about as economical to just go and watch at the bars.
And I bet you'd have more fun if you ended up going with friends too. So
will say
that element.
When I went to the Buffalo Wild Wings for Anderson Silva, Nick Diaz, that was one of the most fun times I've ever had watching a fight, because there was a strong Brazilian contingency, and just the Silva chants were just drowning out all of our conversations, and it was just a really fun atmosphere to be in.
I'm rooting for you to go to the movie theater. You do what you want, but I'm rooting for you to do that, because I want to know what that experience is like now. It was 8 years ago that I watched this. So, but here's one more question I have for you, kind of on the value here. Where would you say, ideally, the number of pay-per-views you would want to spend this year? And obviously you don't want to spend on any, but accounting for the fact that you will, what's the cutoff? Because I think there's 13 this year. So how many of them would you actually want to buy?
I would want to buy all of them, because
I understand that.
It would mean that they are providing me 13 pay-per-views that I think, oh my God, I can't miss this. But
they won't.
But exactly.
So what's the
I don't know if
number of
it's-
pay-per-views realistically?
It's such like a case-by-case basis, because if
I
they
understand.
provided me 13 cards that are worth $80, I would do that. Like, this one is kind of on
How many do you
the
think
border.
they gave you last year? That's the real question. Because it's probably similar
6?
expectation this year.
6?
6? Well, let's say this. Does this feel like a top 6 of the year main card?
It's on the border.
I feel like it is, actually.
I think it's on the border, because like,
yeah, it's on the border, but I think it's there.
maybe it's definitely one of those cards. It's like it could be number 6 or it could be number 7.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, fair. Absolutely. I do think the depth of it here is really great. Obviously there's the 2 title fights. I think Jamal Hill versus Glover Teixeira, as much as it's ridiculous that we've gotten to this point where we just said, hey, let's slap together another title fight because somebody needs to wear this belt. I like that it's Glover Teixeira because I do feel like he is the actual number 1 contender. And I never really felt that way about the last month where they had Magomed Ankalaev, had to be in this fight against whoever it was, and ended up being Jan Blachowicz in this case. No disrespect to either of these individuals, still thought Glover Teixeira really ought to be there as the number 1 guy. So at least we have number 1. Jamal Hill is definitely not number 2, 3, or 4 in terms of the contenders, but he is somebody who I look at this and I say, I could absolutely 100% see him winning, and I've always viewed him as a potential champion. Going back, I would say even to his earliest UFC fights. So just watching him, there felt like something special about his talent that you don't always see, and I did feel that way. Now, he said some things in the last month that has certainly disengendered him to a lot of people in terms of how much maybe their rooting interest could be for him in a neutral situation, because he more or less, I'm not going to say he defended Dana, but he certainly sounded like a sympathizer to the idea of if somebody hits you, it's okay to hit them back no matter who it is. And I'm not really on board with that for all the reasons we outlined last week.
No, it has drastically changed. Like, I was already probably leaning Glover on this one just because I like him so much.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, I might buy like a Glover Teixeira t-shirt and like rock that.
You should, but don't buy it through the UFC. Whatever he has on his like website or something, if he has.
By the way, I like that the UFC just repurposed their format for Prochazka Teixeira 2, because that had like the original fight poster. I just looked it up. Yeah. It had the giant number 2 in the background because it was their second fight, right? Sure. And it was like the follow-up to the fight of the year. And this one, they put the giant 2 in the background, but they just changed the tagline to 2 title fights. They didn't even try.
I think it would have been great if it said vacant light heavyweight title 2.
I think it would have been funny if they were like, we have 2 vacant titles. Not necessarily on this card, but that's how many vacant championship belts we have currently.
What's your hunger, moving on to the other fight? What's your hunger for this 4th flyweight title fight between Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno? Because obviously the last one was really great. We've pretty much only had entertaining scraps between these guys. What's your hunger at this point for it?
It's interesting because on one hand, you have, I think, far and away the 2 best fighters in this division. And they've only produced entertaining fights. One of which, an absolute banger, a classic, one, probably the best title fight in that division's history. Then on the other hand, this is the 4th time, man. Like, I know. How many times are we going to do this thing? Like, what if this is a draw? Or what if there's a controversial decision? Are we just going to do it again? Is this just going to be what we do in perpetuity in this division?
I would argue that there is absolutely no way that I want this to be the next fight again for the title. I'm not saying, like, in those scenarios, in those unfortunate negative scenarios, right? I still want something else for the actual championship. We did have Brandon Moreno fought last year against Kai Kara-France for the interim title. This is a unification bout in so much as anything like that really matters, because it's only been a year and the same guy still has the belt, so whatever. But and granted, that does also reveal the fact that yes, Brandon Moreno did have his spot challenged here, and he actually was able to hold on to it. So there is some meritocracy here to that as well. I don't think anyone was arguing that Kai Kara-France shouldn't have been, maybe the next in line. There was a lot of momentum for that one. So the fact that he did win that fight I mean, you can't really deny him at that point, but I want to see other guys get this opportunity. I want to see some fresh faces. And then look, if there is a draw here or there is some sort of controversial ending, I don't know, maybe they can have him fight a third time. When I say a third time, I mean have the individuals fight for the third time this year or something like that for their fifth fight, whatever. As long as we're still, if it's a known commodity and we're going to get a fun fight out of it, we shouldn't be that mad, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, I want fresh faces to get their shot too.
So looking at Davison Figueiredo's last 7 fights, if you include this one against Brandon Moreno, those 7 fights have been against 3 opponents. He fought Joseph Benavidez twice.
Yeah.
He fought Alex Perez. And now Brandon Moreno 4 times.
Yeah.
That's such a weird thing. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm happy this fight is happening, but after this, I want to see something fresh for both of them.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much echoing the same sentiment here. So, what about the prelims here? You kind of noted one with RoboCop, Gregory Rodriguez against Bruno Ferreira, who was a late replacement, unfortunately, for Brad Tavares, which was a more interesting fight.
Yeah,
but man, Shogun, this is his last fight. This is the last fight of anyone who in the UFC for the UFC who actually competed for Pride in Japan. It's kind of the end of an era.
It is. It's also really like, I worry. It's getting to the point where like anytime Shogun steps into the octagon, I'm like, oh no, I hope.
No, that's kind of fair.
I hope this doesn't end horrifically, because I loved, like, Shogun was kind of at like the peak of his power when like the UFC started like catching my attention again.
Sure.
Right. Because like I watched, I think it was UFC 2 or 3 when it was happening. Like,
so you were one of those. Okay. I was not.
I saw, like, I was over at my uncle's house for New Year's Eve and he bought like the pay-per-view of like one of the early UFCs. This was like, I guess it was 1994 or 5. And, I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I remember some guy named Gracie just like running through all these people. And that name just stuck with me throughout the years. And just remember like this little guy taking down these giants basically. And like, they were just like, I was like, oh, he just like hugs them, drags them to the ground. And then they eventually just give up. Like, it's like, he's like sucking the life out of them basically. Mm-hmm. And like, that was what kind of stuck with me. And then like, I kind of, just stopped paying attention to the UFC. And then I remember my cousin brought his...
Your cousin can be your buddy too.
Well, I mean, we still are close to this day. He brought over, I guess it was his Dreamcast, and it had a demo disc for the UFC video game. And I guess the demo was Chuck Liddell versus Shogun that you could play. And
that wouldn't have been on Dreamcast.
What was it then?
It would have had to be like PlayStation.
It must have been PlayStation 2, probably PS2 then, or 3.
It was probably even 3, really.
But yeah, so that was like, no, it was probably. Then what was I thinking of? I don't know. But anyway,
I don't know, man. That was a fever dream.
No, actually, here's what it was. The demo disc that he brought over was Chuck versus Tito.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And then I think there was a demo for the first UFC Undisputed, the THQ series. And I think that was
a fondly remembered series, yeah.
I think that first one had Chuck versus Shogun.
I guess that could make sense, sure.
So I think I'm misremembering there. But yeah. So anyway, Shogun is just kind of like an instrumental part in like when I was like starting to like, he was one of the first names that I learned when I was starting to get back into MMA and like becoming aware of like what was going on in the UFC.
Sure. So I guess the main question that we have to ask, and we're kind of getting tight on time, my friend.
Yeah.
Are these must-watch prelims with Shogun against Poteria, with Gregory Rodriguez again, the fight we mentioned, Thiago Moises is fighting Mezcal, I'm butchering that name. I'm terrible with that. Costa, and then Munir Lazzez against Gabriel Bonfim. That's just the ABC aired prelims. There's others as well, of course. But are these must-watch prelims to you or no?
They're ones I'd like to catch. Also, I'm a fan of Terrence McKinney. I think he's going
deeper
places.
On the prelims, absolutely.
Josiane Nunes, Warley Alves are also.
Jalton Almeida. People love to watch him.
Yeah, Nicholas Dalby's taking on Warley Alves, so that's a good fight too.
It seems like there's fights you like, but maybe not necessarily the most. I have to carve out time for this one. It's like I'd rather just, if I have to watch the fights, I'll catch the pay-per-view.
I think I would watch the prelims. I think the prelims are ones that, like, if I have no other commitments going on, then I'm gonna turn these on and enjoy them a lot.
What is the one fight on these prelims, non-pay-per-view, that you gotta watch? Like, if you can make any time for it, you gotta carve time for this one fight. Which one?
For sentimentality, I'm probably gonna go the Shogun Poteria,
just to be able to watch him go out.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, Gregory Rodriguez, he's somebody that I'm really high on. Terrence McKinney, I mentioned earlier, like, very high on him.
McKinney against Ismail Bonfim, who apparently the odds on this one are pretty close, and I'm surprised by that. So I'm curious what that means here.
Yeah, so those are the two that immediately stick out. But yeah. I think it's probably got to be the Shogun fight.
Okay. Yeah. For me, it's definitely the McKinney fight. But I'm looking forward to this pay-per-view, to be honest. I don't think this is kind of a like a half-ass type of effort. This feels like a good pay-per-view.
I agree.
A good step forward, so I'm happy with this one, and I'm very curious to see where you end up. I hope you go to that movie theater, but you do what you want, sir.
But yeah, like, it's not me talking on the quality of this card when I say it's kind of on the border of, like, am I going to drop my $80 on this? It's just that the bar continues to raise for how good the card needs to be for me to spend.
And you don't know where it is yet for you, yeah.
$80. God, that's just
fair.
a lot of money, in addition to an ESPN Plus subscription that you have to have in order to buy the pay-per-view. It's like you got to pay the cover charge to get into the bar, and then, oh wait, there's a second cover charge if you want to get into the VIP section. It's like,
I understand that. But let's try to wrap up here with a little bit of gaming stuff. We're still kind of in a cool period with the gaming landscape as well. There's not really a big January release this year, is there? Like, Pokemon Legends Arceus last year was a big one, but this one doesn't feel like one.
Fire Emblem Engage is the big one.
I guess so.
It's probably not a Pokemon title, but Fire Emblem's a big Nintendo franchise.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess it's not on my radar as much, so I don't look at it to the same degree. But that doesn't. You know more about this than I do. I defer to my game expert here.
So Fire Emblem actually has become a bigger and bigger title. I think Fire Emblem Three Houses, like Awakening on 3DS, was like the big breakthrough for that game or that series. Like, back into, like, away from, like, all right, this is a niche strategy series for Nintendo, to, okay, this is starting to get some mainstream attention. And then with Fire Emblem Three Houses on Switch, it really started picking up, like, some momentum.
Sure.
Also this week, we have the Persona 3 and 4 re-releases coming to all consoles and PC. Well, Persona 4 Golden has been on PC for a bit, but this is the first time it's going to be on consoles.
I feel like January has been historically, at least in recent years, a very, like, here's a good month for us to give you re-releases of games that you missed and kind of get excited for. Just looking back, because I was looking back, yesterday, and just kind of looking at January releases, and I'm seeing a bunch of, like, oh yeah, this game wasn't available on PC, now it is. Like, this is like a good month for, like, that kind of thing historically.
It also holds true because the Dead Space remake is this month.
There you go.
And also,
that is a full bore remake, right?
Yes, that is from the ground up remake.
Different. Yeah,
added voice acting to a lot of things as well.
It's not just a new coat of paint like a lot of these games. Yeah.
Also, Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition, and then Forspoken is another big release that's coming out this year, or coming out this month.
Mm-hmm. Wait, Age of Empires 2 or 3?
I believe it's 2. But it's the Xbox version. I'm sorry. The Xbox version, not the PC version. The PC version,
I was going to say, because talking about what you've been playing this week, I finally finished the Halo trilogy, the original trilogy of Halo games, and I did get in just a little bit of time playing Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition on the PC.
Yeah, that actually did come out in 2019. I just looked that up. And
okay, yeah, I got mixed up because I'm like, what was I doing?
They've been churning out a lot of Age of Empires stuff because, like, Age of Empires 4 just hit last year. I haven't had a chance to play that one. That's on Game Pass as well. I mean, if you're interested in the Age of Empires series, you should check that one out.
So I hadn't played Age of Empires probably since Age of Empires 2 was new. So we're talking about almost 25 years ago at this point, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I'm playing through it just to, like, I only kind of went through, like, the tutorial a little bit, and I'm like, hey, it's okay. I don't know if I'm going to devote a whole lot of time to it. I feel like I'm moving more away from what I used to enjoy about kind of these type of titles and like 4X and simulation and that kind of thing, like strategy, excuse me. I don't know. I'll play it. I'm going to give it a little more time. Because it's just the tutorial. So I think maybe I need to kind of at least play a game through to see. Mostly I just wanted to dip my toes in while I still have PC Game Pass and kind of check it out. But I did want to say about Halo real quick is that now that I've completed the Halo trilogy, first off, I would say 3 was my favorite of the 3.
Okay.
At least part of that is because it's the most modern made one.
I thought
it was the most cinematic of the 3, and I was really enjoying the levels this time better until the second to last level called Cortana. And that's where you're inside of I guess it's the flood ship or whatever it is, their area where you got to get Cortana back and take her out, right? And I flat got stuck, didn't know where to go, and I got frustrated. I'm like, why do I need to look up a video to watch how to get out of this level? It's stupid. It's so stupid. Just give me a waypoint. And it was giving waypoints. That was another thing I did like about that game. It was giving me waypoints to go to in a lot of the other levels at times. Now, it wouldn't always pop up like the moment you had to go. Maybe it would be like, okay, we can tell you're playing a little longer. Let's get you over there. Never did that in this level. I was running around for like 10 minutes and I just got so frustrated. So that actually really hurt my opinion of that. I don't know if it's just something that has been modernized in more, like in Halo Infinite or anything like that. But man, it really frustrated the heck out of me and it kind of left a bad taste.
Well, Halo Infinite's pretty much open world.
Right, but if you're in a mission in an open world game, there's often, directions of where to go and that kind of thing. Does it have that?
Yeah, it doesn't really. Yeah, it does a good job of telling you where to go. I would recommend, if you like the cinematic nature of Halo 3, I would say Halo 4 might be worth a go. It's also, I'll be honest, a different developer.
I didn't like it enough for me to want to play it anymore. I'm kind of, at least for now, I'm very over Halo. I may go back to it, but I don't think you can get me back in there now.
But yeah, you also have to remember it's a different developer. That was when 343 took over development, and I think they did a great job. A lot of people gave them crap because they changed a lot of the direction of the story because that was kind of the end of the Flood trilogy. So they had to find a different type of enemy, and they found a really unique enemy. God, what's the word I'm looking for? They found a really good enemy type, you no longer have the Flood, the Covenant, and you have the Covenant still, but the Flood is no longer really a factor.
Good, because I honestly was very over the Flood too.
Now you have this
they weren't a fun enemy to engage with for me.
You have this new thing called the Prometheans.
Okay.
And they're kind of this futuristic, almost neon colored enemy, and they have a lot of really cool enemy types. And I don't know, it's worth a look. It's one of my favorite if you look at it from the 2023 lens of which Halo is fun to play in the modern era. It's up there on my ranking.
That's fair to know. That's helpful. I think probably the next game that I'm going to try to sink my teeth into though, because Age of Empires is not that. I might play a game or two here or there, but that's not what I'm really looking for. What I'm looking for is to play Forza Horizon 5.
Hell yeah.
I already downloaded it. I'm excited to give that one a try. I didn't know, I meant to ask you, but I just kind of looked on my own before. I was going to ask hey, is there cursing or is there any violence of any kind other than just cars driving around? Because I want to know, can I play this in front of my young children?
I think you'll
be
fine.
And I did look into it and it looked like it's not that at all, which was really great.
Yeah, I think you're probably fine. I mean, maybe
most racing games you're usually okay, but I didn't know what I was walking into with Forza Horizon.
I will say that Need for Speed Unbound, the most recent Need for Speed game, a surprising amount of cursing.
I am not surprised at that one single bit, to be perfectly honest. That of all the series out there, that one seems like the one that would be maybe, let's say, a little more edgy for my young children. My children are 7 and 5. They're not watching things that are like that. I kind of police it a little bit,
especially in the music. I was driving, I'm did they just say that in especially there were some sexually explicit lyrics and I'm whoa, okay, interesting.
I'm not a prude. Midnight Club Dub Edition is probably my favorite racing game of all time, and there is a song on there by Pitbull before he was Mr. Worldwide and this this kind of crossover guy. He was let's say a little more grimy, dirty, rapperish type of guy, and there's a song he has called Damn It Man, which is fun and catchy and I enjoy, but also is a song I would not play for my children.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean the soundtracks, I guess I'm not surprised, and cursing in the game even wouldn't surprise me. But that's good to know that Forza Horizon 5 is something that I could just bust out. And they love vehicles, they like that kind of thing. So usually they're like, "Can you drive that car?" And I'll be like, "All right, fine." So if it has a lot of that to it, I'm sure I'll have a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean it's a really fun game, and the intro is one of the best intros to any game I've ever played. Not even any racing game. Like it's just a cool ass intro.
I will make sure that I'm geared up for that then.
And they'll probably enjoy watching it too, because it's just over the top and outrageous.
Maybe I'll do that after this. Maybe we'll go upstairs and put it on, because my kids are off. Like we're recording on Monday, Martin Luther King Day, and my kids are home. So maybe I'll show them. We'll see.
It's worth it. I mean, it's a very good game.
I also wanted to get in one quick complaint, because I was trying to engage with PC Game Pass's cloud function, and it just isn't working. Like straight up not starting. I'll pick a game and I'll click like start, and then it'll come up with this screen. There's like a
rocket
jet,
ship,
like the jet plane or shit. Exactly. It says beta at the bottom. I understand it's beta. It just stays there. Nothing happens.
Oh no.
And so I just closed it. So I can't play any cloud gaming right now. And that is very frustrating.
I wonder if there was like service maintenance or anything like that, because I've never had a problem with it. And I'm not a big cloud gamer.
It's not the first time that I had this issue. So I mean, I have not reached out to tech support. I can do that, but also I'm playing other things. I'm just like, you know what? I'll do something else with my time. I'll come back to that later.
Sure.
I kind of just want to play like some of the old Xbox games that they have on cloud streaming, like the ones from Rare, like Perfect Dark. I want to play Perfect Dark.
Hey, you can just download Rare Replay.
I don't think that can get that one, actually.
No?
I'm not seeing it on there.
Oh, I guess, yeah, that wouldn't be PC. I think they never released that on PC. It's one of the few like Xbox exclusives that they didn't ever put on PC.
Yeah, that's frustrating, because I actually did kind of want to play that Rare Replay, but I'm not going to buy an Xbox to play Rare Replay. It's just not happening.
But we do have to kind of wrap up here soon. But there was some Ubisoft news where they basically said that like a lot of games recently just haven't been selling well for them, and they specifically mentioned Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope, which is a very good game, and I'm upset that it didn't do better. I'm hoping that doesn't bode poorly for another sequel for that series, because it's a good series, but.
Yeah.
Apparently, they canceled 3 games that were unannounced. Games, right? 3 unannounced titles, and then that's on top of 4 unannounced titles that they canceled last July for similar reasons.
Sure.
And then they also delayed Skull and Bones again, which
I'm so shocked.
I made this point on my Nintendo podcast, but the first time that I saw a demo for both Dead Island 2, which comes out in a couple months here, allegedly, and Skull and Bones was before I had even applied to work at Game Informer. I've been at Game Informer for 8 years.
Yeah.
And I had not even applied to work at Game Informer for the time that I actually got hired, because it took me a couple times, because it's such a competitive field.
Yes,
but
it is.
With that, I saw demos for both of those games at E3 2014. And it's so wild to me that we just can't get these games out. And I honestly, I don't know, like, are we ever going to see Skull and Bones? Like, I feel like they have to release it at some point, just try to recoup some of the cost.
I don't know if they do or not at this point, because, I mean, they're canceling projects left and right. Maybe they eventually decide it's a money suck, because this is a game they would have to continue to support after release.
Yeah. It's
not even just like you put it out the door, let's see what we get. Man, they're kind of stuck with an albatross even if they put it out. I wouldn't be surprised if they did cut bait with it. I mean, you know more about that world than me, but just it's hard not to look at that and say this is a healthy situation.
Yeah, it's been, every time I've played it a couple times, it's been underwhelming. So it's like, I don't even know, like, I was never a big fan of like the naval combat in Assassin's Creed in the first place. So maybe I'm like the not the target demographic here. But,
I know a lot of people that did like it, yeah.
But it's just like, all right, well, what is this doing cool that like the Assassin's Creed naval combat doesn't already do in games that I already own? And it's like, oh, well, you can do multiplayer. It's like, okay, fair enough. But like,
I think the idea is people, there's not a lot of pirate simulations out there. There's the one for Xbox.
Sea of Thieves.
Sea of Thieves, thank you. But that's a console exclusive, and I know a lot of people who like pirates and the idea of being able to play a pirate simulator that don't have Xbox anymore.
But it's only in the ship. Like, it's not like you're doing the other cool stuff that
sure,
pirates
no,
do.
That's
it's
great.
like,
granted, that's that. Yeah,
at
I don't
least
know.
in Assassin's Creed, in Assassin's Creed, you can board the ships and you can take
Yeah.
like hand-to-hand combat against the people on the ships to take over their cargo. And it's like, that's the pirate simulation I want. And it's like, I'm getting that in a game based in like ancient Greece.
Sure. Yeah, maybe it's time to give up the ghosts.
Yeah, I don't know. But like, that's it. That's disheartening news for Ubisoft. They do have an Assassin's Creed
it's
title.
It's distressing news in general for another gaming company. Now, granted, the conglomerates are kind of not the ones that people necessarily are rooting for, but there are a lot of people who work there who do a lot of great work and make some great games. And
we're rooting for the industry to be healthy as a whole. That's what you're ultimately
100%.
wanting. But yeah, that's just upsetting news. Hopefully that Ubisoft can recalibrate its sales expectations, and Assassin's Creed Mirage comes out this year, supposedly. So hopefully that
I imagine they'll get that out the door.
Yeah,
I think if that's hell or high water, Ubisoft is going to get an Assassin's Creed game out the door. If they have to get something, it's going to be that.
And that's deemed as kind of the return to like more of the classic style of Assassin's Creed after like Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla like became these massive open world like kind of feature creep style.
I wonder how
levels.
people are going to feel about that, like in the modern time, because now like the gaming landscape really has changed. People aren't playing that; they haven't played that in a while. Are they going to be receptive to it?
I welcome it because
sure,
Assassin's Creed Odyssey is probably my favorite Assassin's Creed title by a large margin. Right?
Oh wow, okay.
Valhalla, I was super excited for because it's the follow up to that, and it's like a similar style. I felt so overwhelmed by everything in Valhalla.
It was too long, too.
There was too much stuff going on, and I after about 10 hours, I was like, I'm done with this.
I did play this completion, but yeah, it took like interminably long, to be perfectly honest. And I am someone who actually thoroughly enjoyed both the length and the content of Red Dead Redemption 2, which is actually just as long, but it felt like it needed to be. That didn't need to be. But I know we got to wrap up here. I did just want to ask real quick, what games were you playing the last week?
Sports Story, which I'm
still on that. Okay.
And it's not very good.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's probably not going to get a super great review score from me at Game Informer. I just finished it over the weekend, and so I'll be able to write my review fairly soon here. And then here's the thing that I'm more interested in talking about, which we don't have a whole lot of time because I do have to skedaddle here in a bit.
Sure.
But I was looking at the release calendar, and of course we talked about how excited I am for Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. That is a sequel to my favorite game of all time, Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild exists in the Legend of Zelda series, which is a long-running series that has many entries, but very few of them get direct sequels.
Mm-hmm.
The other two entries in my top 3 list are Ocarina of Time and Final Fantasy X. Both of those games are entries in long-running series that rarely get direct sequels, but they both have direct sequels, and I have not played either of those direct sequels.
Interesting.
So in preparation, or I guess in anticipation of playing the direct sequel to my favorite game of all time, I am going to try to knock out both of those other direct sequels to my favorite games of all time in Majora's Mask and Final Fantasy X-2 prior to the launch of Tears of the Kingdom.
I am so surprised you never played Majora's Mask before.
I didn't have the expansion pack back when it was on N64.
Yeah.
And then, I tried playing it on 3DS, but I'm just my body like rejects long handheld experiences. I feel like it has to be like a bite-sized experience. So I haven't had a chance to play a whole lot of it because I've been busy in my personal life, and also my gaming life has been consumed by Sports Story.
Sure.
But hopefully I'm without a review game for a minute here, and I'm able to actually play Majora's Mask through.
And you did finish God of War Ragnarok as well, so that to get that off your plate too.
For sure. Yes. Yeah. So that is kind of what I'm looking at as far as my gaming on the horizon. I've played through the first cycle of Majora's Mask, so I'm back to being a Link and not a little Deku guy. So that's promising. I've actually made meaningful progress as opposed to past times where it's I've got frustrated being the Deku scrub and just kind of gave up on that. I've tried it 3 times before this.
Okay.
And it's just I bounced off of it, and hopefully this is the time. Hopefully this is the charm.
I'm rooting for you, sir. But yeah, let's kind of wrap it up here. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever it is you're listening to us. And while you're at it, would you kindly follow our social handles at Brian P. Shea and at Scott_Fontana on Twitter and Instagram in some cases.
And of course, you can reach us with questions, feedback, and topics you'd like to hear about at groundandpwnedpod@gmail.com and at groundandpwned on Twitter. Until next time, enjoy the fights, enjoy the games. We will talk to you next week.